Welcome back everyone. Once again, we have to talk about another device that came out a little bit of time ago, but it wasn't a year, it wasn't like 6 months. Only just 2 months ago did the Google Pixel 5, or actually more than that, it was like a couple of months to be honest. But it was around that October timeframe, so it's actually been about 2 months at this point, and I can definitely tell you this phone hasn't really had a lot of downs. Typically I say it's a lot of ups, a lot of downs. Really wasn't the case. This was a very consistent phone from the get-go. I think the biggest asset and the smartest thing that Google did at that time, and where they kind of hold up now in this phone, was that they didn't release $8,000 phone, but at the same time they didn't flop in another area. But one of the biggest, most prestigious things about a Google Pixel beyond the stock software was actually the camera department. And this was one of those years. I think the Pixel 4 and 4 XL were the first year that we actually saw the Pixel lineup not really hold up in that specific value point when it comes down to the camera. Every single year beyond that, the whole entire Pixel lineup were one of the best cameras of that year. And with this phone, it really wasn't that. It wasn't a bad camera by any means, but it definitely was not the best camera of that year, especially not the best single camera even. Now this thing had an interesting camera setup on the back, which I'll get into in a second, but right now a lot of these things are still selling for that $699 price tag that they originally came out with, but you can still pick them up for much cheaper in the used market if you want to. I've seen some for less than $600, and I've seen a couple carriers do deals as well, even though these are unlocked phones. So I believe Google was running some deals here and there, so keep that in mind. But price tag wise, it stayed pretty consistent, which is really good. These Pixel phones have always, maintained their price tag for the most part. Now the front still looks beautiful, still has that 6-inch OLED display with that 90Hz refresh rate, which is something I'm really glad they maintained. I was afraid that with a cheaper price tag they were going to cut that out, but they ended up not doing that, which is huge. And I really like the fact that they maintained that 90Hz refresh rate. And in terms of the front, there's really not much else to it. It stayed consistent. It's a 1080p panel, hole punch display, and really it looks good. There's really nothing wrong with it, even though it's not a 1440p panel, even though it doesn't have a 120Hz refresh rate, even though there's no fingerprint sensor in the display. It still looks pretty good for the most part, and I think that's a pretty good thing about this phone, and definitely one of its assets for sure. Now it has that USB Type-C port on the bottom, which is awesome, and on the back you have that aluminum back. Apparently it was aluminum. To me it didn't really feel that good, to be honest, but I already talked about that. But you do have that camera set up on the top of this device, which, like I said, wasn't bad, wasn't great. It was pretty much just it was a little bit above average. I think that's the best way to put it. You had that 12.2 megapixel wide angle lens, then that 16 megapixel ultra wide sensor. Now you can do 4K at 60 on this thing, and you had a lot of capability behind it. You had night mode, whatever else this camera had at the time, which I talked about a lot, and I showcase the features all the time. And I've even dropped a lot of camera comparisons between this phone and I believe the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro, and I pretty much found that at the end of the day, the Google Pixel actually has a really good back camera. I'm glad it has that ultra wide sensor, but because it doesn't have that telephoto lens, and because it doesn't really have 8K capability, and there's no 4K on the front, this cannot be the best camera of the year, cannot be the best camera out of any phone ever. Unfortunately, previous Pixel phones of that year may have done a better job, but in this case, it just cannot take that title because of the lack of those specific features. But it doesn't mean this camera is a bad camera. Like I stated before, it's a very good camera, and even 2 months later, it still has held up pretty well. But I just really wish Google had taken a better approach for that front camera. We still have not gotten a Pixel, I don't think, with 4K capability on the front, and I feel like next year it's going to happen, but it may be a little bit too late, to be completely honest. We may get 8K capability on the front with the Samsung Galaxies, who knows? But that's pretty much the camera. Like, there's really not much more to hit on, and not a lot has changed. We haven't gotten the next version of Android since then, because this thing, I think, came out with Android 11, so we really haven't had too many issues with that either. So in terms of the camera setup, it's great, and I think it's good. Like, I think if you needed to use this camera, it's perfectly fine, and for the price tag that it is, $699, it's a really good camera setup. But again, it just can't be the best camera this year, especially when we had phones like the Note 20 Ultra, the S20 Ultra, the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Those cameras definitely take the lead. But before, a couple of years ago, the Pixel lineup was like one of the best cameras of the year, and it's interesting how those things kind of change. So in terms of the camera setup, that pretty much covers it up. Software wise, like I said before, still pretty much on Android 11. I think it's gotten a couple of security updates here and there, but for the most part, no crazy huge changes, just a couple of updates, monthly updates here and there, which I think I've talked about a couple of them, maybe not on my second channel, but for sure at the end of the day, this phone has held up extremely well in the software department as well, as expected. Now this thing does have that Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G chipset, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 620 GPU, and 8GB of RAM, which is more than enough RAM. I will tell you though, before I even dive deep into the performance, which I've already done before in like 3 other videos, this phone phone only has one storage model, which is that 128 gig model, which to some people may not, matter. Like 128 gigs, that's still a lot, but that's the only one version of phone that they have. They don't have a higher storage or a lower storage model, which really sucks. And I wish there was some sort of, higher storage model. I feel like that would have been a really good feature about this phone, but they just didn't do it. And I think Google does that on purpose so they can sell more Google Drive space. It just makes sense at the end of the day, but that is a pretty big thing to keep in mind. So when it comes down to this specifically with the storage model, that's really a huge complaint that I've had. But the performance segment is one thing I can't really complain about. I thought because it had kind of like a watered down Snapdragon chipset, I thought it was going to give me a worse experience. That really didn't end up being the case. I think this thing actually had a pretty good, performance overall. I've compared it to a lot of different phones since it's been out, the previous Pixels, the new iPhones, the iPhones of last year, all these other phones, and I found pretty consistent experience throughout. I don't think it's the smoothest experience. Like, I don't think this phone is smoother than my iPhone 12, but I think it's faster. I think it's faster in some cases, and I think the RAM management is better on the Pixels than it is on the iPhones, and that's a very important thing to note because this phone is cheaper than an iPhone 12. I think it's about the same price as an iPhone 12 mini, but when it comes down to it, you're definitely getting still a really good performing phone. I haven't had any massive defects. I haven't had any issues like that. So when it comes down to that specific angle, I will tell you the Google Pixel 5 is a very, very good performing phone still. And typically after I use a phone for a couple months, maybe the performance starts going down. Maybe it isn't as fast as it used to be. In this case, that is not necessarily the case. This is still a very fast performing phone at the end of the day. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 4080 mAh battery, which I actually found to be a pretty good battery life overall. It's definitely not perfect, but it really gets the job done. As I've said before, I need to come up with a new phrase. This specific battery life is very, very good for this type of phone. Again, not a flagship type of device. It is a cheaper phone. It does have wireless charging. It has a reverse charging too, which is nice, which is kind of pointless because with a 4000 mAh battery, it's not like this had like a 10,000 mAh battery or anything, but still a cool feature. And I think for sure when it comes down to it, the battery life on a stock Pixel phone will do much better than some phones that have bigger sized mAh batteries, but they're just not as good because the software isn't optimized. Google builds Android, so it only makes sense that it actually is optimized for their own specific phones, and it knows what to do with that battery size. And so far the last couple of months have done very well with this phone too, so not really many problems here either. And to kind of sum up this video and answer the question, is the Google Pixel still a really good phone? Is the Pixel 5 still holding up all this good stuff? Well, what I can tell you is that for sure this is a very, very good phone. This is almost like a flagship phone. It does skimp out in a couple of areas. I feel like the storage models, there's not really that many crazy features with the Pixel lineup anymore. I feel like it's just taking that budget route, which is perfectly fine. You're getting a very good software experience, longevity that's going to be extremely good, custom ROM support eventually, I'm sure when there's more ROMs. The camera on this thing is very good as well. There's not really that many complaints about it, and I haven't even heard that many complaints about this phone in the last couple of months since it's been out. Typically we get to see on Reddit or something people trending and people talking about, oh, this is the problem with the Pixel phone or this or that. I haven't really had that experience, and that's a huge thing about this phone. I've not seen those, which is perfectly fine, and I love seeing that. I love seeing not problems. Basically, that's the best way I can put it. The price tag has gone down a little bit in the used market, and there's just not that many complaints about it. But I will tell you, if you're looking at a Pixel 5 and you plan on buying it brand new, I will tell you, a Samsung Galaxy S20 on Amazon right now is selling for cheaper than what a Google Pixel 5 is. And that's a pretty important thing to note because you can pick up that phone in the used market on Amazon. I think it's certified refurbished for less than a brand new Pixel 5. And I would rather have a Samsung Galaxy S20 than a Google Pixel 5 any day of the week. That phone has way more features, has way more capability, and it just makes sense at the end of the day to pick up one of those phones than a Google Pixel 5. But I've already done comparisons between them. I've already done reviews of them and all that stuff. But I will definitely tell you, if it came down to me, I would rather have a Samsung Galaxy S20 than the Google Pixel 5. And if you have to go the brand new route, obviously the Pixel 5 is cheaper. But if you want to go the certified refurbished route, a Samsung Galaxy S20 is cheaper. So take that as you will. I'll go ahead and find the cheapest ones of both of these, link them down in the description below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. But that's really pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions as well, leave them down in the comment section. Hit the like button, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.